Jonathan, Bob Corker, who has been a big supporter of Jeff Sessions, now says his sense is the fix is in. What's going to happen here?
Well, this is a done deal. Jeff Sessions will not be the Attorney General after the election. It's very clear. He doesn't have the support in the Senate, and obviously the president despises him.
So does that suggest you don't think that the president will wait until after the investigation comes in?
No. He'll fire him after the election. The question
after the election or the investigation?
I believe he'll fire him after the election.
Really?
I can't say for sure. This is my speculation.
Even before the results of the Mueller investigation come in?
The Senate is pleading with him, please don't fire him before the election. They're not going to be able to keep him from firing him after the election. The question is, I don't believe, I mean, we don't know, obviously, but the question is what happens then? And as Hans said, the nominee for a new Attorney General will be required by Democrats and Republicans to promise that he won't shut down the investigation.
I don't know if that's true, Noel. Is that true?
Wait, let me just finish the point quickly. Before he's confirmed, there will be an acting Attorney General, and Trump will want that acting Attorney General to shut down or compromise the investigation. And the question is, how will Congress respond to that? The answer to that is the midterms. In other words, if the Democrats control the House of Representatives, that acting Attorney General will not be able to shut down the investigation. He'll be subpoenaed on the Hill and prevented from doing so. If the Republicans maintain control of the House, they will successfully shut down the investigation.
What do you see, Noel?
Well, you know, there's two things going on. There's Jeff Sessions, this is very sad to me because he was one of the very first loyal supporters that came on. He could not have been a bigger fan of Trump and his policies and stood behind him, he and his wife and his family,
at
forever.
Critical points.
Absolutely. When he was criticized and all through all the, strange things that were going on in the campaign. The other thing is, I feel like Jeff Sessions, and anyone that knows him knows that he just follows the law. And I feel like he is caught in this horrible deal of doing what's right, doing what Trump wants, there's two dynamics going on. But the larger picture is...
Well, there's also the argument to be made, you know what, you don't want me here, I'm gone.
But is he effective? And here's the thing that I'm looking at. Trump has made it clear, I don't like you, I think you're bad at your job, and you've got Sessions that's saying, I'm just going to stay because I think I'm doing a great job. So you have two conflicting messages. If I were Sessions, I would resign.
Well, I mean, you can say they're conflicting messages, but I'm not sure, Jonathan, that that's also not quantifiable. You have a guy who is enforcing zero tolerance at the border, for example, who, when the president wanted that, did that. I mean, this is somebody who believes that he is carrying out the president's agenda. Is he wrong about that?
No, not at all. And so when Republicans like Lindsey
competence
Graham,
doesn't matter.
Well, when you're worried about saving your skin, if you're the president, he doesn't care about anything else except not getting removed from office. And not having these quite possible crimes exposed for everybody to see. So he wants an attorney general to protect him.
Trump thinks
because he's not protecting. That's the only reason he's weak. Is because
let me ask you about something else, because in the midst of all this, you've got this closed-door meeting that the president has with evangelicals, right, on Monday night, warning them that if the Republicans lose, quote, they will overturn everything we've done, meaning the Democrats, and they'll do it quickly and violently. And violently. There's violence. When you look at Antifa and you look at some of these groups, these are violent people.
Well, that's just more despicable demagoguery by the President of the United States. You know, it's one thing to say, I want you to help us hold the Congress. That's fine. But when he starts saying that all Democrats are Antifa, all the Democrats.
Well, it's also somebody, Noel, who once said at one of his rallies,
what kind of an answer
once he said that he wanted to punch protesters. Another time he said, if you beat up on protesters, I'll pay your legal bills. This is a guy who's warning against violence?
This is a guy who is rallying to his base, and the base does what Donald Trump says. Look, it wasn't but last week that he said, if I'm not in office, if I am gone, that the stock market's going to crash and we're all going to be poor. Do you remember when he said that in an interview?
Oh, yeah.
So that's
I think it was only like a week ago.
It's all running together.
Even Fox went after him on that.
So you have that with the scare of the market, because as you know, we are rallying at all-time highs, and everybody's very excited about, the explosion of everything going good with the economy. So you have that, and he's put fear into that. The second thing is he's putting fear into the the evangelical support base that's saying everything is at risk if you don't make sure that you keep the House and Senate and blah blah blah. But the thing of it is, this is how he governs. This is how he talks to his base. But what we were talking about a minute ago, I'm not defending it, but the base loves it. So what you're seeing is you're going to see races being won because he's rallying his troops.
To
are
her
the Democrats.
point, the base, and it may be different. We'll see what happens with the blue wave, but it is the base on both sides that tend to come out in these midterm elections.
Right. That is right. A lot
So
of people
is he being
don't vote.
smart?
Well, politically, he's very shrewd. It's very interesting. He doesn't know any of the details of actually governing or the policy.
But his gut.
But in terms of the politics, he is so up on everything going on in all of these primaries. And I think one norm that he has changed, maybe permanently, is that presidents in the future may decide that they will get involved in primaries the way he has done, because it helps them get more power.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.